This, quite frankly, should surprise no one. If you've been watching my series of what's been going on in these reform councillors and these reform controlled councils, this should really not surprise you. But shockingly, in some of these reform, controlled councils, not all of them have a majority. You're talking Nottingham, Leicestershire, Derby, they are in sort of full control there. They have the majority there. But there are in other councils where they sort of don't. They have to rely on other parties to, well, get stuff done. And here's the thing. They are now finding problems to work with other different parties, even independents. Why? Because remember, they ran their entire local election campaign on the fact that they are the best thing since sliced bread, that these other parties, including independents, were somehow corrupt as the day is long, and that only they can solve all the problems going on in local councils. Meanwhile, stay tuned for the video we've got coming up from the British Social Workers Union, where they react to what's gone on in Leicester. Because, oh boy, do they have something to say about the appointment of the 19 and 22-year-olds in charge of child and adult services. Anyway, before we do get on to that, as I said, they're shockingly finding it really difficult to work with other parties after running such a campaign. Should we be surprised? Absolutely not. Because quite frankly, imagine if you were one of those opposition councillors and someone ran an entire campaign like that. Why on earth are you going to work with them? Why on earth are you going to bail them out when they ran an entire campaign, sometimes in hustings, saying it straight to some of these councillors' faces of, you are corrupt, we are better, we are going to solve this, we are going to, hit the ground running. Well, as you know, they've certainly hit the ground, but it's certainly not been running. It's been more like, face first in a lot of cases. In fact, the vast majority of cases in this case. So let's go on and find out about this, about these poor reform councillors trying to understand why will no one work with them. Anyway, before we do get on into this, please remember to click the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the one donation link called Buy Me Coffee, the YouTube thank you button. And of course, as always, there is the YouTube membership button down below. So thank you very much to everyone who does help and support the channel that way. Thank you so much. And now on with this. So let's crack on into this. This coming from the BBC as Reform UK struggles to find friends to share council power. Oh dear. Oh dear. I wonder why they're finding it really difficult to find friends. I'm sure it has nothing to do with the campaign that they ran. Anyway, Reform UK's success at the recent local elections has now propelled many councillors with now limited or no political experience into council chambers across England. And oh boy, have we been seeing that. While Reform UK's rise was, of course, the big story of those elections, almost half of the councils now were up for grab, were, of course, not won outright by any single party. That, of course, means that those newbie councillors are now having to navigate the so-called hung councils, where parties now with little in common often work together to get the business of local government done, which again is what normally happens. But remember, they expressly ran a campaign where they said every single other party is bad, is corrupt, is terrible. Like, there are all the problems that are going wrong in your local area, and we'll solve all these problems. If you're in the opposition, why on earth would you then go and help out the reform councillors? You just frankly wouldn't at that point. But it continues, so far this hasn't panned out the way for Reform UK, which of course isn't involved in any formal coalitions, pacts, or even deals in areas where local elections were this year. This was despite now the rampant speculation about the Reform Conservative coalitions ahead of the polls, with party leaders both Kimmy Badenoch and Nigel Farage now ruling out council deals. So what's going on? In some places, like Warwickshire, Worcestershire, and Leicestershire, Reform UK have enough councillors to form a minority administration and is now attempting to govern alone. In other areas where coalitions were possible, Reform UK have either shunned the cooperation or vice versa. So, as you can see, this isn't the fact of, like, in some cases that they're finding it a struggle to like make friends. In some cases, outright, they are shunning any cooperation because, again, of their campaign that they ran. This, again, is going to cause problems for a lot of these councils because it's going to mean paralysis. And trust me, some people are going to really start to notice it. I know someone commented recently that I think they were saying they were in Warwickshire, and that was their council, and they hadn't noticed any different yet, noticed like any change yet. But oh, trust me, give it time and you will. Give it time and you will. Local politics in particular can have a very big, far more dramatic change a lot quicker at your local level than at a national level. Right? So trust me, by the end of like 3 or 4 months' time, you might be feeling the paralysis. You might be feeling the paralysis quite significantly. So, where, of course, Reform UK came, there we go. Can't say it now. Let me get me tongue right back there. So, where Reform UK now has, of course, explored potential partnerships locally, its policies have now been viewed with either suspicion by the established parties. Again, what policies? Because there is no policy in a lot of these places. In Cornwall, of course, we've talked about this before. The Liberal Democrats, Labour, and the Conservatives have now refused to work with Reform UK, even though it was the biggest party and had won the most seats. Instead, the Lib Dems, of course, teamed up with independent councillors to run Cornwall as a minority administration. This, of course, infuriated Reform UK's group leader now in Cornwall, Rob Parsage, who branded the coalition deal undemocratic and a total stitch-up. Except, no, that is how local democracy works. They are allowed to do that. Anyway, did, of course, other parties contrive to exclude Reform UK? The newly minted, of course, Lib Dem council leader Lee Frost does not think so. He said, "The reality is our core values at the heart of what we stand for are two very different things, and it makes working together completely incompatible," Frost told the BBC. And then, of course, Reform was given 2 weeks to try and form an administration and chose not to. Anyway, Frost said that Reform's UK council candidates mainly campaigned on immigration. Again, this was the big thing. Local councils do not have anything to do with immigration. And yet they all campaigned on immigration as if local councils had any like power to somehow stop immigration. This was, of course, echoed a lot in conversations with other local party leaders across the country. The BBC was told Reform's candidates had very little actual local policy to offer, and mostly were now focusing on national issues, such as stopping small boats crossing the English Channel. Again, they have no policy. Like, they have no policy on this. That stopping small boats crossing the Channel, that is not a council's responsibility at the end of the day. That is probably the Home Office. That's where that falls under. Local councils, nothing to do with that. Anyway, slashing, of course, the wasteful spending by councils, just like the Elon Musk Department of Government Efficiency in the US, was, of course, also a common campaign theme. In Worcestershire, where Reform won the most seats but fell short of the majority, the party's supposed lack of political policy was still a major sticking point for the Conservatives, saying they haven't got a local prospectus. That was part of the problem, said Anne Kent, the Tory group leader on Worcestershire's County Council. They didn't even stand on any local issues. It was on national politics. How can you actually go into coalition with somebody if you don't even know what they stand for? Exactly. Why? If you've got no local policy, why should they support you? And I'm surprised they're not bringing up the fact that they ran very much a big campaign on the fact of how much better they were going to be than, these other people, which I suspect is really a lot of the reason why some of these people are refusing to work with them. Anyway, Joanne Monk, the Reform UK Council leader in the county, said that she only had a, quote, brief couple of chats with the other party leaders, but was uncompromising on coalitions, saying, "I'm damn sure we're not on the same wavelength," she said. I wonder why. I wonder why. She, of course, followed the lead of Farage, who ruled out any formal coalitions at the council, but she did say the interests of the local people will do deals in common interest ahead of the local elections. In Worcestershire, Worcester, the Reformed UK minority administration may need, of course, to do deals to actually pass any key decisions and to avoid other parties banding together to now veto their plans. Recognizing this, she actually acknowledged that other parties were, quote, going to have to work with us at some point. Depends what you actually want to do. And that's when things could get interesting, because what if they go, sorry, that's dumb. We ain't going to vote for that. We're vetoing that. Not only that, oh yeah, we'll only back that if you don't slash funding in this area. Like, this is how politics work, but they don't seem to understand how that works. This is why putting people in who have no idea about how local politics works, how like politics itself actually works, or have any idea what to do in their local area, because they ran on national issues that have nothing to do with their council. Of course, it continues in Northumberland. The Conservatives did retain their position as the largest party, but given the increase and the impression that they were now willing to entertain coalition talks with Reform UK, which gained 23 seats. They said, "I would work with anyone and my door is open," to the Conservative leader Glenn Sanderson. But Reform, the next day, put out a very large press release saying that the price for working with the Conservatives would be extremely high. So on that basis, I assumed that door was then closed on me. I'm going to have to try and track that down. I'm going to have to try and track that down. Oh, I'm going to try and find that. No talks were, of course, held with the Conservatives, and they formed a minority administration. Weeks have now passed since the local elections before Mark Peat was, of course, voted in as Reform UK's group leader in the county. And as a result, he wasn't even in position to talk to anybody. Everything had already been agreed, Pete said. It was far too late. Anyway, a Reform UK sources did admit that the party was, of course, a bit flat-footed here. And elsewhere, as many of its new councillors now got to grips with their new jobs in the weeks following the local elections. Trying to support the network of these councillors in any form of training sessions and a local branch system is trying to be developed by the by the party, sorry. But this week, of course, Zia Youssef, one of the key architects behind that professionalism drive and the Doge cutting cost initiative, resigned as party chairman, leaving a gap in now the party's leadership. And of course, we should point out he is back, not back as the party chairman, but in charge of that Doge initiative, which again leads me to heavily believe it was all to do with those Burqa comments, and he was not happy with that. And he left the party because, I'm sorry, what did he say when he left the party? It was no longer worth his time to try and make, Reform UK, get Reform UK into government. That is a very loaded statement. Like, why wasn't it worth his time to make them an actual party for government? And then why would you just come back? Like I say, I think he was offered, and I think they were desperate, because otherwise he would have gone and done the rounds on the Sunday shows, and I think we would have had a lot of dirt dished. I think we would have had a lot of dirt dished, what he would have said. But like I say, he's now back in the party as the head of the Doge team, not back as party chairman. Like I say, I think we'll see who is the party chairman in a couple of days. I don't know if they've even got one yet, as far as I'm aware. But yeah, it is a mess. The party is in absolute chaos on this one. Reform UK's, of course, deputy leader, Richard Tice, said the party's success at the local election was again partly because of the significant efforts and improvements to the infrastructure of the party spearheaded by Yusuf. But again, if you look at a lot of the critics of Yusuf in Reform, they've said he's done nothing in those regards. They've said he's done nothing. Though Yusuf is, of course, now gone, again, he's back. The party is now, of course, considerably strengthened its foundations at local level, gaining 677 new councillors and, of course, 2 new mayors. A Reform UK source said that the party's bosses will be keeping an eye out now for standout councillors who could go on to become parliamentary candidates before the next general election. Jesus. They also said in areas where Reform UK runs councils and minority administration, is going to take some now compromise with the other parties and independents to pass budgets and key policies. In, of course, the messy world of town halls and council chambers, that could be a very tough apprenticeship. Oh, yeah. That ain't going to happen. No one is going to pass the crazy, insane stuff that Reform UK's want to go and pass. I can guarantee you that now. No one is going to pass any of the stuff Reform UK is going to want to pass at all. No one is going to touch it with a barge pole. And like I say, you will get those other Reform councils that do get full control and will go like, headlong into their crazy council policies. And like I say, next year, when it comes around to April, when we're again talking about budgets and setting budgets for the year, oh boy, that is going to be some interesting stuff going on in those councils. I can tell you that now. That is going to be very interesting when we get around to that. But as always, thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think, of course, about all this down below. I would ask if you are surprised, but quite frankly, you shouldn't be, to be honest. But as always, thank you very much for watching. Leave your comments down below. And of course, don't forget to click on the like and share button on your way out. And of course, we'll see you all next time.